Good evening, dear friends. Gather close and lend an ear to tales not of joyous revelry, nor of heroic knights in shining armor, though elements of such may flicker at the edges. No, tonight we delve into the shadowed valleys of human history, where the clash of ambition and the lust for power painted the world in hues of deepest crimson. For warfare, as old as our first sharpened stone, has ever been a brutal, heart-rending force, and within its maelstrom, acts were committed, acts so beyond the pale of common contest, so steeped in calculated cruelty, that even the stoic chroniclers of old, men accustomed to the grim realities of their times, would pause, their quills trembling, before setting such deeds to parchment. These were not mere battles, you see, but storms of destruction that swept away not just lives, but the very essence of what it means to be human, leaving scars upon the collective memory of mankind. In those ancient days, the lines we draw today, the neat categorizations of war crimes, did not exist in quite the same manner, yet the suffering was no less real, the intent no less chilling. The echoes of these devastating acts, committed under the banner of conquest or the guise of retribution, still whisper to us across the centuries, reminding us of the terrible price of unchecked power and the fragility of peace.
Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Let me know in the comments below.
Our first tale takes us to a time when a young, fiery king from Macedon, a name that would blaze across the known world, Alexander, was forging an empire. It is the year 332 before the Common Era. Alexander, a prodigy of war, a whirlwind of conquest, swept eastward, the Persian Empire crumbling before his relentless advance. His genius was undeniable, his armies a force of nature. But there stood, defiant and proud, the island city of Tyre. Ah, Tyre! Imagine a glittering jewel set in the azure sea, a fortress seemingly impregnable, its walls rising sheer from the waves. She was the queen of the seas, a hub of immense wealth, her ships sailing to the farthest corners of the world, her merchants laden with exotic goods. For centuries, Tyre had laughed at sieges, her formidable ramparts and mighty fleet, her steadfast guardians. When Alexander's emissaries demanded submission, the leaders of Tyre, perhaps emboldened by their city's storied past, perhaps underestimating the Macedonians' resolve, refused. A fateful decision. They could not have known in that moment of proud defiance that they were signing their city's death warrant, sealing a doom that would horrify the ancient world. Alexander, accustomed to swift victories, was incensed. Frustration turned to a cold, calculating fury. If Tyre would not yield from the sea, then the sea itself would be bent to his will. He conceived a plan of breathtaking audacity, a feat of engineering that spoke volumes of his unyielding determination. He would build a bridge, a massive stone causeway stretching from the mainland, across the churning waters, directly to the island's heart. Imagine the scene. Day after agonizing day, for 7 long months, his soldiers, men of iron will, toiled under a punishing sun, hauling rock and timber, driving piles into the seabed. The Tyrrhenians, far from idle, rained down arrows, launched fire ships, their own naval forces harrying the Macedonians at every turn. It was a monumental struggle, a testament to human endurance on both sides. The air filled with the cries of men, the splintering of wood, the hiss of flaming projectiles quenching in the sea. But slowly, inexorably, the causeway grew, and when at last it touched the mighty walls of Tyre, when Alexander's siege engines could finally be brought to bear, the city's fate was all but sealed. The Macedonian forces, their bloodlust stoked by months of bitter resistance, breached the defenses. And then, dear friends, the full, unrestrained wrath of Alexander was unleashed upon the hapless populace. What followed was not conquest, but butchery. Over 6,000 Tyrrhenian souls, men, women, children, were cut down in the streets, their homes ransacked, their sanctuaries violated. The historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, in his chronicles of Alexander's campaigns, tells us that the surviving men, some 2,000 of them, were subjected to a fate of unimaginable horror. They were crucified, their bodies nailed to crosses that lined the shore, a gruesome, silent warning to any other city that might dare to defy the young conqueror. This was not merely punishment, Rufus observed, but a deliberate, calculated act of terror, a symbol etched in blood and suffering, designed to break the will of all who opposed him. And the remaining 30,000 inhabitants, those who had somehow evaded the initial slaughter, the women and children, were rounded up and sold into the grim, anonymous fate of slavery. Tyre, the queen of the seas, was left a broken, bleeding shell. Now, let us turn our gaze westward, to the sun-drenched shores of North Africa, where another great power, Carthage, once stood as a beacon of trade and culture. For centuries, Carthage had been Rome's most formidable rival, a thorn in the side of the burgeoning republic. Their rivalry was a bitter, protracted affair, played out across the Mediterranean in a series of brutal conflicts known as the Punic Wars. Dominance was the prize, and neither side was willing to yield. But by the time of the Third Punic War, in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, from 149 to 146 to be precise, Rome's patience had worn thin. A powerful voice in the Roman Senate, that of the statesman Cato the Elder, thundered a chilling refrain, ending every speech, regardless of its subject, with the ominous words, "Carthago delendaste." Carthage must be destroyed. It was more than a political slogan, it was a death sentence, and Rome, with its relentless legions, was to be the executioner. The final siege of Carthage was a desperate, drawn-out agony. For 3 long years, the Carthaginians held out, their city a bastion of defiance. But in 146 BCE, the Roman war machine finally broke through. What ensued was not merely a sacking, but a systematic, deliberate annihilation, an attempt to wipe an entire civilization from the face of the earth. The ancient historian Polybius, an eyewitness to these dreadful events, wrote of the Roman forces slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Carthaginian civilians. Imagine the terror, the screams echoing through the once proud streets, now running slick with blood. Of the estimated 700,000 souls who had called Carthage home before the siege, a mere 50,000 survived the initial carnage, and for these wretched few, there was no mercy. They were enslaved, their identities stripped, scattered across the vast Roman Empire, their culture and heritage to be ground into dust. But Rome was not yet finished. The city itself, the magnificent structures, the bustling marketplaces, the sacred temples, all were systematically demolished, razed to the very ground. The land was said to have been sown with salt, a symbolic act to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again, that Carthage would remain a barren wasteland, a monument to Roman vengeance. Polybius, his heart heavy with the horror he had witnessed, described the destruction of Carthage as one of the most harrowing sights imaginable. Buildings consumed by fire, the streets choked with the dead, the air thick with the stench of death and despair. It was a war crime of such magnitude, a deliberate cultural genocide, that its echoes resonate even now, a chilling testament to the depths of human enmity. From the sun-baked ruins of Carthage, our story now travels eastward once more, to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here, for several centuries, from roughly the 10th to the 7th century before the Common Era, rose the Assyrian Empire, a name synonymous with unparalleled military might and, alas, unimaginable cruelty. If any empire perfected the art of psychological warfare, it was Assyria. Their conquests were not just about territorial gain, it was about instilling a bone-chilling terror in the hearts of their enemies, a fear so profound that it would quell any thought of rebellion. Their armies were feared across the ancient Near East, not only for their martial prowess, but for the horrifying, systematic cruelty they meted out to those they captured. The Assyrian kings, figures like Ashur-nasir-pal II and Tiglath-Pileser III, did not shy away from their brutal deeds. Indeed, they boasted of them, commissioning vast, detailed reliefs and inscriptions that depicted their atrocities for all to see. They described with chilling precision how they tortured and mutilated their foes. One of their most infamous methods was flaying, skinning their captives alive, sometimes while they still drew breath. And these ghastly trophies, the skins of defeated chieftains and rebels, would be displayed upon the city walls they had conquered, a grotesque banner of Assyrian dominance.
In other instances, prisoners were impaled on sharp stakes, their agonized cries serving as a symphony of terror, their slow, public deaths a stark warning to any who might contemplate resistance. The historian Diodorus Siculus, in his Bibliotheca Historica, provides vivid, if grim, accounts of Assyrian cruelty. He notes how they would often systematically cut off the limbs of their prisoners, hands, feet, noses, ears, leaving them as maimed, broken spectacles, a living testament to the price of defiance. Cities that dared to rebel, that rose against the iron fist of Assyria, faced swift and terrible retribution. Mass executions were commonplace. Thousands of inhabitants, men, women, and children, would be beheaded, their heads piled into gruesome pyramids, or they would be burned alive, their screams lost in the roar of the flames. For centuries, this reign of terror held sway. Yet, there is a grim irony here, for it was this very same unyielding cruelty that ultimately sowed the seeds of their downfall. The Assyrians made too many enemies, their brutality breeding a hatred that, in time, coalesced into a powerful alliance. Now let the winds of our narrative carry us forward in time, to the vast, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia in the 13th century. From these harsh lands emerged a figure of unparalleled ambition and ruthless efficiency, Genghis Khan. His Mongol Empire, forged in fire and blood, would become the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. The Mongols were masters of cavalry warfare, their horsemen a seemingly unstoppable tide. But their conquests were marked not only by military genius, but also by a shocking, calculated brutality and mass executions on a scale rarely seen before. Yet, the Mongols added another, even more insidious weapon to their arsenal, an early, horrifying form of biological warfare. One of the most chilling examples of this occurred during the siege of Caffa, a Genoese trading post in the Crimea around the year 1346. The city had long resisted Mongol assaults, and the siege had ground to a frustrating stalemate for the attackers. It was then, we are told, that the Mongol forces, themselves ravaged by plague, decided upon a ghastly tactic. Using their mighty trebuchets, they began catapulting the plague-infected corpses of their own dead soldiers over the city walls. Imagine the horror within Caffa, defenders already weary from siege, now faced with a silent, invisible enemy, the contagion spreading through their ranks. Many historians believe this desperate, cynical act may have played a significant role in the subsequent outbreak of the Black Death in Europe, as fleeing Genoese merchants inadvertently carried the pestilence with them. But even without such insidious methods, the sheer scale of Mongol massacres was staggering. Consider the fate of Naishapur, a prosperous Persian city in 1221. After a rebellion that saw the death of one of Genghis Khan's own son-in-laws, the Khan's vengeance was absolute. He ordered the utter annihilation of the city's populace. The Persian historian Juvaini, writing in the aftermath, recounts how every man, woman, and child was put to the sword. Estimates of the death toll vary, but some contemporary accounts place it as high as 1.7 million souls. The The city was razed, its irrigation systems destroyed, and it was said that even the cats and dogs were slaughtered, lest any living thing remain. Naishapur was left a desolate wasteland, its ruins a monument to Mongol fury, its skulls piled high as a warning. This pattern of terror was not unique to Naishapur. Genghis Khan and his generals, including his grandson Hulagu Khan, who famously sacked Baghdad in 1258, employed similar tactics across Central Asia, the Middle East, and into Eastern Europe. Cities that resisted were obliterated, their inhabitants either systematically executed or enslaved. And alongside this physical destruction came widespread sexual exploitation. Genghis Khan himself is reputed to have fathered hundreds, perhaps thousands of children through the women captured in his campaigns. Indeed, modern genetic studies suggest that a significant percentage of men in a vast swath of Asia today are direct descendants of the Khan. This pattern of using sexual violence as a tool of conquest and subjugation was emulated by his generals and soldiers, leaving a deep and painful scar on the conquered populations. Our final journey into these dark annals takes us to the cold northern seas, to the era of the Vikings. From the late 8th to the early 11th centuries, these North seafarers, with their iconic longships, dragon prows slicing through the waves, struck a fear into the hearts of coastal communities across Europe. They were renowned as explorers, traders, and settlers, yes, but also as ruthless raiders. Beneath the romance that sometimes clings to their name lies a stark history of brutal raids and devastating destruction. The Vikings were particularly known for their ferocity when attacking the often undefended monasteries and settlements that dotted the coastlines of England, Ireland, and France. These monastic communities, centers of learning and relative wealth, were tempting targets. One of the earliest and most shocking of these raids occurred in the year 793, when Norse warriors descended on the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria in England. Lindisfarne was a revered center of Christianity, a place of peace and prayer. The attack sent ripples of horror throughout Christendom. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a contemporary record, describes the event with stark terror. Here were dreadful forewarnings come over the land of the Northumbrians, and miserably terrified the people. These were excessive whirlwinds and lightnings, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. A great famine soon followed these tokens, and a little after that, in the same year, on the 6th before the Ides of January, the harrowing of the heathen miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne Island by rapine and slaughter. The monks were killed or enslaved, the sacred treasures looted, the holy buildings set ablaze. This raid on Lindisfarne was but the overture to a symphony of violence that would echo across Europe for centuries. Viking raids were characterized by their terrifying speed, the element of surprise, and an unyielding ferocity in combat. In many instances, entire villages were wiped out, their inhabitants put to the sword, the survivors, if any, taken as slaves, thralls as they called them, or left to scratch a meager existence from the smoking ruins of their homes. These raids were not solely about acquiring plunder, though wealth was certainly a powerful motivator. They were also about instilling terror, about asserting dominance, about forging a reputation so fearsome that tribute might be paid to avoid their wrath. And so, dear friends, our journey through these shadowed episodes of history draws to a close for this night. From the calculated devastation of Tyre by Alexander, to Rome's obliteration of her rival Carthage, from the systematic terror employed by the Assyrian kings, to the sweeping massacres and insidious biological warfare of the Mongols and the fierce, brutal raids of the Vikings, each tale is a somber testament to the horrific depths to which humanity can sink in times of conflict. These were not simply acts of war as we might understand them, but deliberate attempts to break the spirit, to erase cultures, to instill a fear that would outlive generations. The geopolitical landscapes of their times were irrevocably altered, but more profound still was the legacy of suffering, the echoes of terror that transcend the mere passage of centuries. These ancient acts of brutality, which today we would unhesitatingly label as war crimes, remind us of the profound and often devastating consequences of unchecked power, of ambition untethered by compassion, of ideologies that dehumanize the other. As we reflect on these dark chapters, let us not do so merely to recoil in horror, but to understand the fragility of peace, the preciousness of justice, and the enduring importance of upholding human dignity in our own times and for all times to come. For it is only by remembering the darkness of the past that we can truly cherish and strive to protect the light of the present. If these explorations into the shadowed corners of our shared history have stirred something within you, if they have given you pause for thought, then I invite you to continue this journey with us. Do like this telling, subscribe to our chronicles, and ring the notification bell so you do not miss our future forays into the fascinating and sometimes troubling complexities of the human story. Until we meet again, may your nights be peaceful and your reflections profound.